Welcome in everybody to my tutorial series where I take you from not knowing how to use Unreal at all to getting a job in game development. In today's episode, we are going to be implementing the crouch state. And what this means is we're going to take those crouch animation blend spaces we made last time and we're going to hook them up to the animation blueprint. We're going to add some animation drivers, well, one animation driver, to our anim instance. We're going to add the input for crouch, and we're going to do a whole bunch of other things in there as well. So it's going to be a good one. But, anyways, make your task now. You can feel free to pause, but just make a task called implement crouch state, and I'll hover over the description shortly here. Okay, so we click on implement crouch state, and this is just going to be under that same epic we usually use. So feel free to copy that description down. But yeah, after this episode, we'll have crouching working completely. So that'll be a pretty good milestone for us. And we have a few C++ changes to make as well, as I mentioned. And we'll set our parent to player character. This is an engineering task. I know you're probably pretty happy about that because the last couple episodes have been very art heavy. Alright, we drag that in, go to our board, and move it into in progress, and we can get going here. So open up P4V, and we'll make our change list. Implement crouch state, and add the HSS tag at the end. Always good to know what game you're working on. Before we know it, we'll be done with Hide, Seek, Survive and moving on to the next one. Right, we'll close down all those files, we won't be needing them. And the first one we're going to work on is the input comp, CCS. So open up the .h and the .cpp. And we'll work on the .h first. We basically just need to add the crouch input stuff. Alright, we'll scroll down a little bit. And we add in this command crouch function. So it's going to work a lot like it did when we had the command look, command move, etc. Basically, we call that function and it'll call a process function. But for now, we're going to add our action. And this is kind of the same thing, except for it's going to be just a Boolean instead of an actual value as the look and move ones were, because those were axes. And this, we just want, hey, we press the crouch button, do something. And that's how this is going to work. So pretty straightforward. It'll actually be easier than the other ones we did. But the reason we need a command is because sometimes the player will be in a different state. That means we have to respond to crouch differently. Okay, so there we go. Now we have the process crouch function. So yeah, we just want to make sure we're moving the character into the correct state. Like, for example, it won't be in Hide, Seek, Survive, but for the shooting game we're going to make next, we want the character to be able to slide as we add our get and check character movement component reference function. And this is just kind of the same as the other ones. Nothing really to say about this. We just have to use our get and check functions to make sure we don't end up with null pointers. And then last but not least, we add our reference, and we can just paste that to kind of keep the notation the same. Except for it's the character movement reference, of course. Okay, we'll swap in the character movement comp CCS. And for anybody who's wondering why we're not just calling it character movement ref instead of adding the CCS in there, it's because if we do need to use the HSS version for some point, then we're going to need to have another copy of it. And it's good to know which one we're talking about. Okay, so now we move into the .cpp and go to the end of the public section and paste in our command crouch. And as you can see, for now, it's literally just processing crouch. And this again will be expanded upon when we add new movement modes. Because, for example, if your character was sprinting and then you press the crouch button, then you would go into a slide. But that isn't going to be part of Hide, Seek, Survive, so we don't have to worry about that until the next game. Right, and then we'll go down here into the protected section and paste in process crouch. And feel free to pause and copy this down. I'm going to go line by line. And the first thing we're going to do is get and check if our character movement component is valid using our function we built. Then we're going to call a function on the character movement component to see if the character is crouching. And if they are crouching, we're going to uncrouch them. And if they are not crouching, they're going to enter the crouch state. So this is just a simple toggle, but the great thing about the character movement component, as I mentioned last time, is in terms of networking, that is all set up already for us. So there is actually a variable called B wants to crouch that gets triggered when we crouch or uncrouch using this function. And by the way, don't try to use the same function on the actual character movement component. It works differently. We have to use the one on the character. Alright, and so at the end here, we're going to add the include for our character movement comp CCS. And you can use the little folders. Makes things a little easier. Alright, so there we go. And one last thing, we have to put in our get and check for the character movement comp. So it's going to work pretty much exactly the same as the other ones do. If you remember, we have a getter on the character now. We made it a couple of times ago. Don't remember what episode that was. Oh yeah, it was the anim instance one because we need it there. So same kind of thing. We need the character, and then we get the character movement comp. And now we can move on to the anim instance. We have a little bit of work to do in there. We're going to be adding a new driver, and we're going to be making some changes to bugs that I found when testing this that have to do with our direction calculation. But I'll explain more about that when I get to that part. And then we'll scroll down to our drivers, and we're going to add one for whether or not we're crouching. because we need to know that to cycle between the animation states in our animation blueprint. So just call it B is crouching and set it default to false. I don't know why the notation in Unreal is to put B before a boolean, because you don't do it for any other variable. Like it's not F speed for float, but who knows? Alright, and then I think we're all set in here, and we can move on to the .cpp. And this, I'm going to paste in some code, so don't be nervous. I'm going to go line by line, as always. So just paste it in right below where that speed calculation is. And the first thing we do is we set whether or not we're crouching, getting that from the character movement comp. And that's pretty straightforward. And then we move on to the part where we're fixing a bug with our direction calculation. And what was happening if the character was 0, if their speed was really low, then the direction was getting set to negative 180 for some reason. So when you initially started moving, it made it look really terrible. So that's why we're adding this little section here that defaults it to 0 if we are in the case where the speed is 0. And then we have the same thing as last time where we calculate the movement rotation. And the reason we're calculating it there before this next line is because we need it here. Because basically we have to see if the last frame we set it to 0, we want to immediately set it to the movement rotation. We don't want to try to interpolate, because that is how you make the start of the animation look really terrible if you're transitioning from 0 to 180 immediately. And when we type return there, by the way, what that means is if that's hit, then we will completely exit out of the function and the rest of the stuff will not be ran. So that's what that means. But yeah, all this is to solve a little bug that I was noticing when playtesting. And then from there, we just have our aim rotation, and we can delete the movement rotation calculation, because we just did it right above. And we can update this comment, because it's not the first thing we're doing anymore. And the rest of this will be exactly the same as what you had. So just a quick little bug fix, and we can move on. But yeah, that makes the start of the animation transitions look a lot better. So it's a pretty important change. Alright, then we'll go into the character.cpp, character ccs.cpp, and we're going to go down to the setup input comp function. And we're going to add the action to this list of actions that we're validating. And basically what this is doing is if any of them are invalid, that's what the little 2 pipes mean, or. So if any of them are invalid, then it'll just return out. So none of the code below will be ran. So we won't try to use any null pointers, which would crash the engine, so it's always good to avoid. Okay, so now we get to the point where we're actually binding our action. And it's kind of the same as the other ones. Well, it's literally exactly the same. We just basically tell it the action we want to bind to, and then the input comp, command crouch function that we want to bind to that action. And then we're all set in the character. And that's also the last C++ change we have to make for now. So we can go ahead and build and see if we get any errors or warnings. But yeah, we'll set up that binding in the engine as well. Alright, so we'll try to build. And I do get a warning here, but it's something to do with the builder script. And if you do get a warning and something like that where you don't actually make any changes to it or have any idea what's going on, don't go in there and try to fix the warning because you'll probably do more harm than good. So you see here, I saw a warning come up, and we get this little pop up about the use of string.contains. And we're not going to mess around with that. To get brought right to where the error is, you just double click on it. And see that code, I am not messing with that. I don't know what that's doing. We're just going to close it down and deal with the warning. And it is what it is. Because again, you'll probably do more harm than good trying to fix code that you don't understand. Alright, so we're all built. Now we can go into hide, seek, survive. Alright, and the first thing we're going to do is mess with the anim BPs. So we'll go into the human folder and our third person animation blueprint. And we'll go into our lower body here, and we're going to right click and add state, and we'll call it crouch. And then we're going to left click and drag like so to get little arrows going from side to side. And what these are transition rules. So what we put in those rules, it's going to check that every frame. And if it meets the rule, then it will do the transition. So for this, it's walk to crouch. So we're going to check if we're crouching in that animation driver. And if we are, it is going to go to the crouch state. And that's how the transitions work. So now we're going to do the opposite one. So here we're in the crouch state and we need to check if we need to go back to walk. So then we want to check if we're not crouching. Then we want to walk. So these trees can look really complicated, but for now we thankfully only have 2 states. But as you can imagine, when we have jump, sprint, all this other stuff in there, it's going to be a lot more complicated. Okay, so then we actually click into the state, and we use our lower crouch blend space. And then it's the same thing as the walk blend space we already set up. Just drag in the get direction and get speed, and plug those in, like so. And then we can compile and save. And now we're going to go to the upper body state and do the exact same thing. After I close down those extra windows, getting a little cluttered up there. Alright, so again, we'll add a crouch state, drag out the transition rules. Throw our get is crouching in there. And then not crouching for the walk transition. Right, looking good. Now we'll hook up our actual blend space. So we want upper crouch. Okay, drag that in. And we'll get our direction, plug that in, and get our speed. And plug that in. Alright, we're looking good. Alright, close it down. And now we're all set in the animation blueprint. Because remember, the first person one inherits from that. So we don't need to make any changes there. They're already done for us. And then we'll go down to third person input. And we'll duplicate this jump action because it's the analog input example we have. And then we'll go into the CCS core content and open up our actions and move the crouch action there. And then we want to rename it to be crouch CCS so it matches the notation of the other ones. And we can open it up. And we need to go into triggers and get rid of released. Because we don't care if this is released, right? It's just we care when it's pressed. And this is another thing in that new input system that I was talking about. That's so nice that you can set the triggers right in here. It especially is nice when you need to process whether something's held down, because you used to have to do that manually. And it was quite a pain. As we go in here to our default gameplay context and add a mapping, and then we put our crouch input in there, and we want keyboard left control. That's typically what people use for crouch on mouse and key. And then we'll add as well the B button. So the face button, right. As you can tell, I grew up using Xbox controllers. Alright, we're looking good. And we can update those mappings in a menu. We'll do that later in the input settings menu. Okay, so that's done. Now we can get into the character. So go to core, characters, and open up our character. And we'll go to our input comp, and we'll swap in crouch. And this part is actually really funny. I wasn't able to get crouch to work when I was testing, and I forgot about this flag on the character movement component, can crouch. It's disabled by default, so you have to enable it, or else it isn't going to work at all. And it took me longer than I'd like to admit to figure this out. So at least you guys don't have to go through that process with me. Alright, and that's all the work we have to do in the character. And now we're ready to test and see how it all goes. Alright, we'll close that down. And we have our play as client like we had before. So we can test the networking. And look at us go. See us walk around. Notice how the guy's facing forward now. Because previously it was kind of swerving all over the place. And our transitions look pretty good, side to side, from a stop. Yeah, so all in all, I'm pretty happy with this. And see, we can crouch and not crouch. And our speed reduces when we crouch as well. But yeah, all in all, we're looking pretty good. And the other thing that's important is this is all working in a multiplayer game, which is a very, very, very good foundation to have. A lot of people teach standalone and then add multiplayer later, but I think exposing you guys to it early is the best way to go. Okay, so we'll delete the build from last time, and we'll package it up. And as always, I'll skip ahead until my build is done. And it's all set, so we'll close everything down. And we'll give it a test, make sure we're all good. We can just close out of those errors. I find they happen if your PC hasn't been restarted in a while. Alright, so now we're crouching. See our speed reduces and we can see our camera transitions. We're going to do some work in the player camera manager quite some time from now to make that transition smoother. But we're not going to do that in this initial character work. That's kind of a polish thing that we'll take care of when we're inside of the player camera manager to do something else. Alright, so we're looking good. We can throw this into review. Then we'll go into Perforce. Just hit refresh a few times to make sure we have everything. And this all looks good. So we'll move it to our numbered change list. Press OK. Alright, we're looking good. Don't see anything weird. And we can send it on its way. And we'll add our little comment in here after we move it to done. So add our little all set change list 57. So we can find it if we need to. And when I go back to there, I'm just looking to see what the number is in the input log. Alright, so that is it for today, guys. So thank you as always for watching. If you're new, definitely subscribe to the channel if you want to keep up with this series. And if you do like this video and you're new, there are 16 previous videos that you can watch by clicking the playlist at the end of the video. And anybody who's watching, definitely like the video and leave a comment to give me some feedback. It's the only way I can get better, so I really appreciate it. And I spend a lot of time making these videos, so I really appreciate those likes because it helps other people find the videos. And with all that being said, thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.